Hello, everybody. I'm Dave,
I'm Terri.
and we're glad you joined us this week as we continue our discussion on Relationships 101 by John C Maxwell. There's 8 lessons in this little book, and we're on lesson 5 today. And before we get into that, we'll just kind of do a quick review of what we've talked about so far. We've had four weeks of discussion, and I'm going to bring this up on the screen here, and we'll share it with the audience. Terri, what was lesson number 1?
Why are relationships important to success?
Lesson 2 was, what do I need to know about others? 3.
How can I encourage others?
And last week we talked about, how can I connect with others? This week we're in lesson number 5, which says, how can I become a better listener? Terri, what's the theme of this one here?
Treat every person as if he or she were the most important person in the world.
For a lot of us, that's a stretch, isn't it? Every person we encounter, because you know what? We are all important. And sometimes we classify importance of other people based off of whether we know them or not. Maybe they might be not as important to us at the time, but they are important nonetheless, aren't they? They're important to themselves and the people around them, and they should be important to us, and we have to be intentional.
Yeah, it's something that we bring our awareness to.
All right. Now, before we get started on this lesson, I'm going to share a few questions to kind of, assess where we're at personally and where you're at. Maybe you can ask yourself these questions too. What's question number 1, Terri?
Would you describe yourself as a good listener? Why or why not?
Well, what about you, Terri? What do you think? Are you a good listener?
I would consider myself a good listener because, number one, it's one of my values.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I purposely stay aware of intentionally, is my listening skills. And why is probably because my family's always told me I'm a good listener.
Yeah. And when you were young, you kind of had a pivot point where you made a choice about listening, and tell us why that was.
Well, when I was younger, I would realize that most of the time people wasn't really listening,
Mm-hmm.
because I could see them thinking and I could hear them immediately, going into their own stories, not even acknowledging anything that I said, interrupting. And as I learned, as I was growing, I realized most people don't listen. And so I didn't want to make anyone feel the way I felt when I wasn't really being listened to.
So you didn't really feel valued or important, did you? Okay, let's look at question number 2. Have you asked those closest to you if you're a good listener? You just said a minute ago that your family, and I agree that you are a good listener. You've practiced those skills over the year, whether it come naturally or it stemmed from that decision you made years ago. But you are a good listener, and I depend on you a lot of times to be my ears, because I'm not as good at listening as you are. I'm improving and doing better, but I lack in some areas. And you're sort of my eyes and ears oftentimes when I'm speaking to a group of people. And I've asked you if I was a good listener before, and you told me sometimes the truth. And I wasn't, and I didn't agree at first, but I realized you were telling the truth. I wasn't really listening to understand, to make you feel valued. I was listening to solve a problem or to get to the next thing, and I didn't intentionally do that, but I was doing it nonetheless, and I wasn't adding value to you. The third question is, how does body language show whether or not someone is paying attention to a speaker? And are there exceptions to that? Talk to me a little bit about that, Terri. Do you think that's true, that body language kind of displays whether we're listening or not?
Yeah, I think you can always kind of read the energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know if someone's interested or not. You know if they're listening or not. I mean, they're looking up, actually listening to their own dialogues in their head,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to comment, not to really understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we've all talked to people who has grabbed their phone and was looking at their phone. They're not really listening 100%.
Or they're flipping through the channels on the
Flipping
TV.
through channels, yeah, there's not undivided attention, and you know when that's going on.
Yeah. And we don't do it intentionally.
Mm-mm.
You know, there are very few people that I know that are really good listeners. They're engaged in you one-on-one. The work will be going on crazy around it, but they're locked into what you're saying. They can tune that out, and they're being intentional at that time. Now, not everybody's a great listener, but we can all improve our skills and become better at it too. And both people win when we do that,
Yeah.
don't we?
Oh, yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's look at the first statement in your book, and you can get you a free copy of our PDF workbook here and follow along if you'd like. And I don't know if you can see that on the screen. It's white, but this background is white too. But just go to the website. Hang on a second. That's the wrong thing up here. Anyway, go to giantslayerconsultants.com. And again, that's giantslayerconsultants.com. On the homepage, give us your name. On the site, go straight to the site, download your free copy of this to follow along. And you'll notice that there's 8 lessons on there. We're on lesson number 5. If you can download it real quick. If not, take some notes tonight, because what we're going to share is really going to add some value to you and help you become a better listener. And I think everybody can always improve on their listening skills. We're human, so we got room to grow.
I liked in the book where it said Lyndon B. Johnson, who was a senator from Texas, had a sign on his wall that says, "You ain't learning nothing when you're doing all the talking."
Yeah, I agree.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a quote that says, "No man would listen to you if he didn't know it was his turn next."
Yes.
So when people are listening to us, they are listening to respond.
Mm-hmm.
That's human nature, and it's not always the right thing to do, but people want to be understood. We all do. So someone has to take the lead in the relationship to understand that, be aware of that, so that we let the other person be heard and understood. We'll be understood sooner or later. You know, we don't have to be understood right that moment. So it's important.
Another quote that's in the book, it says, "The ear of the leader must ring with the voices of the people."
What do you think he's talking about there?
I think that it means the leader has to have been listening to the people to know and understand them.
Right. So if a leader isn't listening to the people,
then he don't know the people.
Becomes a dictator, more or less, making decisions without understanding where the people are at, what the people need, how they feel at the moment. And it's not that a leader is a puppet of the people, but he understands the people, knows what they need. And the only way we can do that is to listen to the people. For those who have joined us on Facebook or on YouTube, please leave us a comment, and we'll come back to it and answer it as soon as we can. It's on 2 or 3 different pages, and we'll get back to it after the broadcast and address every question, but it also lets us know that you're here and who's watching. All right, let's go to the workbook and go to the first statement in the book. And right here, he's going to give 6 reasons, John Maxwell, about why listening adds value to the listener and to the one speaking. So there's 6 things here. And what's the first one, Terri?
Listening shows respect.
What do you think how does it show respect? What's in your words?
Well, it shows respect because you care what the other one's saying. You're not so worried about you and how you're impressing them. You're really wanting to know them and understand them and
lets them know they're important, that they have value. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Every man I meet is in some way my superior." Now you think about that. Everybody has value of some kind. Sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's undiscovered, and sometimes all it takes is someone to have a listening ear to discover that value and bring it to the top. So in every way, we can learn from somebody something from that person, can't we?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Jason Williams.
Mm-hmm.
He's very, very intelligent. Anything you talk about, he knows. And the reason I think this is because he listens.
You've observed.
I've watched how he listens, and he is a great listener.
He doesn't interrupt.
No.
And he doesn't do all the talking.
Nope.
He does mostly listening, doesn't
And he asks questions to understand.
Yeah, very wise especially
Very
for his
wise,
age.
yeah.
That's right. All right, let's look at the second value. Listening builds relationships. How does listening actually build the relationship, Terry?
Well, I mean, I think you have to, for a relationship to be strong, you both have to be heard by each other. You know, you can't have understanding if you don't listen.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't listen, then you really don't know that person you're in a relationship with. No trust can be built. No respect is really built.
Do you think too that everybody has a need to be heard?
Yeah.
And by being that person who becomes that listener, you fulfill that need, don't you? It's not always about fixing their problem or having the answer to what's going on in their life. Sometimes they just have a need to be heard and understood. What did Dale Carnegie say about listeners?
Says if you can make more friends, it says you can make more friends in 2 weeks by becoming a good listener than you could in 2 years trying to get people interested in you.
Yeah, it actually takes more energy to try to impress everybody and keep their attention, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It takes more intentionality to be the listener.
Mm-hmm.
Less energy, but more intentionality. So think about that for a minute. When you're trying to impress somebody, you have to keep yourself up here so you keep them impressed.
Yeah.
But when you listen, you don't have to impress anyone. You're letting that person be understood. All right. So let's look at the third reason good listening adds value to us, Terry. What is it?
It is listening increases knowledge.
You just touched on that with Jason. He didn't get as intelligent as he has by doing all the talking.
It's about listening.
Yeah. What else do you think it actually helps us with knowledge?
Well, Wilson Mitzler says a good listener is not only popular everywhere, but after a while he knows something. It's talking about, same thing. If you listen, you learn.
Yeah. My dad used to say, son, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And he said, you're not going to get any smarter, or you're not going to learn as much if you keep that mouth moving. And he was so right. Yeah, I've struggled with that all my life. And I have to be intentional when it comes to listening.
I used to tell Autumn when she wasn't listening well, the scripture in James, be swift to hear and slow to speak. Yeah.
And that's especially when you're emotional. We'll talk about that too here in a little bit. But let's just back up a minute. Well, I forgot to talk about what David Schwartz says about monopolizing conversations. This is back on the second value, which was one we just covered.
Big people.
Big people. All right. This is under listening. Builds relationships. And go ahead and share that quote, Terry.
Big people monopolize the listening. Small people monopolize the talking.
Let that sink in for a minute. Big people monopolize the listening. A good listener is always in demand for people, aren't they? Mm-hmm. People always want to be understood, be heard. They're always trying to either find themselves or find the answers. And sometimes just then talking through it helps them discover their answers on their own. So being that listener helps them in that way. And when we become that person, people want to be around us. Mm-hmm. You've got clients that you do personal coaching with, and I see their excitement to come to your sessions because they know you're going to listen to them. You take notes, you do different things, and they know after that session, and they know next week and the week after that, they were heard during that, and they are excited to come talk to you and share that. All right, so listening increases knowledge. Let's recap just for a minute. The first value is listening shows respect. Secondly, it builds relationships. Thirdly, it increases our knowledge. And remember, a deaf ear is evidence of a closed mind, isn't it? Yeah. And I remember the story in the book where John was writing about a tennis coach was teaching this young man. And he would stop him and point out what he could do better. But each time he would do it, the student would argue his point about why the way he was doing it was right. So finally, the tennis coach just started nodding and agreeing with everything he said. Well, there was a woman observing this coaching session, and after it was over, she said, "Why did you let that arrogant person help make you agree with his ways of doing it?" He said, "Well, I realized pretty soon that he wasn't really looking for knowledge or ways to do better. He was buying echoes. He wanted me to agree with him. So he's paying So I'm going to let him pay for echoes. I'm not going to argue with him. So a lot of times people want echoes.
They don't waste. You stop wasting your time when you know.
Yeah, that's right. If you're not a good listener, people will shut you down and just avoid you and not try to help you because they think, well, he thinks he's or she already knows it all. So what's the point? All right, let's look at the fourth value, and that is listening generates ideas. What's your thoughts?
Well, on here it says when you consistently listen to others, you'll never suffer for ideas. And my thought is, we all have different perceptions, different ideas about one topic. And if you're listening to everyone's trying to solve a problem, then you can get the best one from whoever, so more ideas when you're trying to solve a problem is much better than one.
Pride will tell us that our idea is the best way. It's the only way, the only best way. Humility will listen to the other person, those ideas, to come up with the best way, not necessarily making my idea the best way. So it takes a level of humility and understanding and healthy self-esteem to be able to sit down and let people generate ideas about how to achieve something. And someone said there's always more than one best way. We always think ours is the best, or we think it's the best. So it does generate ideas, things we didn't think of. They see it from another perspective. They're connected with a different group of people who may think a different way. We might not have even thought about that if we hadn't heard what they had to say. Yeah. All right. So let's look at number 5. What's number 5, Terri?
Listening builds loyalty.
How does it build loyalty?
Well, it builds trust because you know that you're being heard and that the person cares enough to understand you. And, in the book it was talking about what is the dangers of not listening. And it lists, one, it could end friendships. A lack of authority at work, a loss of parental influence, marriage breakdowns. So, not listening after a while, if you know you're not being heard, I don't think your relationship's going to stand.
You shared
it's got to be a mutual.
Yeah. You shared a story. We owned a little store here a couple of years ago, and during that you were managing it. You had a crew, and tell them about that story about how they're sharing their ideas and thoughts with you actually made the team better.
Well, they were the ones waiting on the customers, so they knew the people, and so their ideas was always better than mine because they knew what would sell, they knew what wouldn't. And so, like at the beginning, I put a few things in there that I thought would sell, and they told me that it wouldn't. Well, it didn't, And then I learned to listen to their ideas because they knew more than me of what the customer wanted.
Right.
And so anytime they'd ask me if they could put something in the store that was new, I would ask them, what's your thoughts? Do you think, and every time they'd sell out of everything they put in there.
And, and here's where the loyalty part comes in. Because you use their ideas and you listen to them, they not only brought that product into the store, they worked hard to make it sell even harder. They pushed it. And then when you did have an idea that they weren't sure about, they got behind your idea and tried to help push that too.
Yeah.
So it made the whole team better because you had to you took the initiative to take their ideas and use them because you trusted them. Now, when we don't trust those on the front line as leaders, we pay the price, don't we?
Oh yeah.
If we do trust them, we reap the benefits everybody gets. All right, let's finally on the sixth value. What is the last one?
Listening is a great way to help others and yourself. It says how. Number 1, it develops healthy relationships. Number 2, it gathers valuable information, and it increases your understanding.
Right.
Win-win.
So win-win, isn't it? And that's another one of Stephen Covey's principles, 7 habits of highly effective people. And always needs to be a win-win in every relationship. But sometimes we don't get to do all the talking. But by listening, taking the initiative to be the listener, we help both people win. We understand more. We know that person better. That person feels better about it. And we talked about when we're speaking or engaging people, they're really asking kind of three questions in their mind, aren't they? You remember what those were, any of them?
Can I trust you?
The first one is, okay, can I trust you to listen to me and let me finish my story or my thought? When we do, that builds trust. The second one was,
do you care for me?
Do you care for me? So now that I trust you to listen to me and hear me out, that shows me that you probably do care for me. You care enough to just back up and listen and ask the right questions. And then the third one is, can you help me?
Can you help me?
Can you help me? So now that we've got their trust and they know we care for them, now we might be able to actually help them. And sometimes it's just letting them flesh it out, talk to us. They solve their own problems, asking them questions. And, for instance, if someone's having a struggle in a situation, instead of jumping right in and giving them an answer or an idea or a solution, we start asking questions on them. Well, what do you think you ought to do? That automatically gets their mind to thinking about options. And then when they come up with an idea, it's their idea, and they're more likely to use it, isn't it? So they take ownership of it. We don't take ownership of their success. They do. We just help them find it.
Well, most people, I'd say all people, have the answers within themselves.
I believe we do too.
We don't have to have someone give us answers. We just got to have people understand and listen and help us flush it out.
There's a deep reservoir inside of us that God's given us. I truly believe that God lives on the inside of each person. And our level of awareness of that gives us more confidence that, hey, we do have all that we need. Now, we have each other because we rely on each other. And sometimes we need someone just to be a listener, the one to ask the right questions and draw that knowledge and wisdom out. So when we take an idea and take ownership of it, begin to move in it, then we know, hey, that was in me all the while. That builds confidence in them for the next situation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we're going to talk about 9 tips to help develop our listening skills. So, I suggest you write down a few of these as they come across. If you haven't tried it, try it and see if it works for you. And I promise you, if you stick with it, it will. All right, Terri, what is the first tip?
First one is look at the speaker.
Okay. Why is that important?
Because then if you're looking at them, they know you're listening. Okay. Anytime you look away like that.
That's right. We do that all the time out of habit.
Yeah.
Phone will buzz, we get a notification, and you're talking to me. I pick my phone up and look at it. That shows me right then you're not fully engaged.
Yeah, and to tell you the truth, when things like that happen,
mm-hmm.
I don't want to finish the conversation. I'm done.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
You just got devalued to some degree. And sometimes it doesn't take much to push someone away.
Yeah.
So you're right. When someone's trying to have a conversation with us, especially a serious conversation.
Yeah.
We need to turn the TV down or off. Shut the laptop down, set the phone aside, and stay engaged and look them in the eye as much as we can. So good tip. Good tip. All right. What's number 2?
Number 2 is don't interrupt.
What does interrupting do?
Well, it angers you, and it also devalues you because undoubtedly the one interrupting things, they have something more important to say than you do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something we teach our children not to interrupt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen you children pulling your pants or wanting your attention or jumping up and down shouting. And you'll get down on their level and you'll tell them, I'll listen to you as soon as I'm done. You're being rude. You're interrupting. So just be quiet for a minute. And you always go back and you address whatever they want. So we stay engaged with the person we're talking to one-on-one, and we eliminate distractions and interruptions and come back to that conversation. It shows respect, shows that person we value what they have to say. And when we value what they have to say, that shows we value the person. Robert Montgomery said, it's just as rude to step on other people's ideas as it is to step on their toes. Now, how many times and I know I've done it, you might have an idea, and then I want to share with you my idea real fast, that my idea is better. Did I just step on your idea?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's times that you're talking to somebody about a certain idea, about a certain subject, which triggers their mind on a whole nother thing that they're thinking about. And so they all of a sudden change the whole subject. Mm-hmm. So you already know they wasn't even there.
Yeah.
But here it says, why does people interrupt? Why do they interrupt? One is they put no value on the other person.
Okay.
And
That sounds harsh, doesn't it?
yeah, but
But that's how the other person perceives it.
right.
Isn't it? We
Yeah.
may not intentionally think we don't value the other person, but our behavior shows them that we don't value. What's important is what they think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other reason was they're trying to impress. So if you're trying to impress, then you're not listening and trying to understand.
Right. How do we do that sometimes?
Just, I think we do it by, telling our stories, and somebody might, you may have a similar situation, so you kind of make yours look bigger and better. And
I'm going to be honest here a little bit. When someone has a story about something exciting, it does trigger a thought about something that's happened in my life. And I want to come back with another story too. And then I'll walk away from that. And when I think about it, I thought, I just tried to outshine their story a little bit. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but because it's a habit. I do that sometimes. I've seen some people will talk about being sick, and they're telling the situation, and they're looking for some empathy or some concern. And the first thing people do is want to shift it back to their story about how it happened to them and how horrible it was. And we get in this competition about whose story was the worst, just like we do with whose story is the best.
yeah,
And that's a competitive conversation that goes on. Sometimes we're not even aware that's going on.
yeah.
But be aware of that we don't interrupt with our own story sometimes. All right, let's look at the third tip.
Focus on understanding. In the book, it says a lawyer and lecturer said, effective listening requires more than hearing the words transmitted. It demands that you find meaning and understanding of what is being said. Meanings are not in words, but in people.
Right, that's good. So when we listen to understand, it makes the other person feel valued, that they are valuable. What they have to say is important. And when we don't automatically respond, it gives them the chance to help us understand even more. When we respond, it should be with a question. Well, tell me more about that. Tell me how that made you feel.
And be sincere. I mean,
Yeah.
really put yourself in a understanding mode. Intentionally seek to understand.
Now, we may not feel comfortable doing that at first, and it may feel like we're faking it. It's not natural, but it will become natural as we do it more and more. Anything we start doing at first is never going to be comfortable and natural.
Yeah.
So don't give up if it doesn't feel comfortable. All right, let's look at number 4. Determine the need at the moment. What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, everybody's different. The book spoke of men always with a fix-it attitude, and the women are just understand me attitude. So you got to know the ones talking to you, what is their need in this conversation? Do they want a solution? Do they want just to vent?
Let's put this in a real life scenario. Let's say you're telling me something that happened during the day that made you angry. My first response usually is, well, you shouldn't have been angry. Think about it this way. Now, how does that make you feel when I do that?
I don't like that.
I just trampled on your feelings, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you shouldn't have been angry,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't solve the problem at the moment. It shuts the conversation down. You withdraw. You don't want to tell me anymore because now I'm into this fix-it mode, telling you why you shouldn't be angry and what you can do to improve that. When I tell you you shouldn't feel something, what I'm telling you is you shouldn't be you, because your feelings are important. They're not necessarily serving you the best at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but that at that point in time is not the best time to address that. Let the feelings be vented. Sometimes we talk ourselves right into understanding why we shouldn't feel that way before the conversation's over without anybody saying it, because then we hear it. We know what it sounds like. We know what it looks like. And sometimes all it takes is letting someone talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And even understanding it, even if you know that it's not the best for them, you still can understand why.
Right. Telling people they shouldn't feel a certain way has always been a problem of mine. And I've understood here lately that that is the most harmful thing you can do in a conversation, to tell somebody not to feel this way or shouldn't feel that way. You may not understand completely, but let them know, I'm trying to understand why you were angry. Tell me more. And usually that gives that person permission to walk through that feeling. But when we try to stop that feeling, it creates a whole other feeling that's not as productive as the other feeling.
Which hurts the relationship, because more than likely that person won't come to you again.
Right. You have a right to feel any way you feel. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for you, but like I said, right at that point in the conversation, it's the wrong time to address it. All right. So where are we at? Number 5?
Yep.
Check your emotions. Why is it important to check your emotions?
Well, I mean,
As a listener, why is it important to check your emotions?
well, it's like, you know, if you've had a bad day and you're a little touchy, and you got to be aware of that, so that when someone's speaking to you, you don't put that mood on them. You don't, you got to drop that emotion if you can.
Mm-hmm.
And
if you can't, what should you do?
I would probably say, I've been having a little bit of a bad day. I'm not able to listen to you real well. So if you let me calm down and I want to hear what you're saying, but let's just wait a few minutes and let me get myself.
There's some scientific reasons for that, because when our emotions are worked up, or we're having a certain hard time at this time, our reasoning mind doesn't work as well as it should. And we're not really hearing the other person. Yeah. We can't engage in that with the other person on the best level. Sigmund Freud said a man with a toothache cannot be in love. Yeah. And that sounds like a ridiculous statement, but when he's got a toothache, that's all he's focusing on right there. He's really not hearing all these other things around us, that when the toothache's gone, he's back to himself, he can hear and understand. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love the person. He's not feeling love at that moment, maybe, so we have to be a reader of emotions.
I mean, we've actually did that raising the kids. If you remember, we'd say, go to your room. We can't talk about this right now, because we had to calm ourselves down. Mm-hmm. And that way, when it was time to discuss, we could do it in the right way.
We could hear better.
We
make better decisions if we needed to. Exactly. All right. Let's look at tip number 6. Suspend judgment. Why is that important?
Well, you got to listen to the whole story. You can't jump to conclusions and assume. Yeah. You have to hear them. You got to, you don't know what all they're going to say and what it's going to lead to. So, you might pass a judgment mid sentences and they wasn't even going in a certain place.
Yeah. So assuming leads to judgments, which leads to a call, which is usually a bad one if we're not really hearing someone. We tend to think we know what the other person's going through, feeling. Mm-hmm. We may have been in similar situations, and we handled it a certain way that we think that gives us a certain expertise on everybody else's way of handling it. And, we may have gained some wisdom on how to handle it, but we don't know exactly how that person's feeling or where that person got to that point. Mm-hmm. We don't know the backstory until we ask.
And
right?
Listen.
So listen, don't make assumptions, and avoid judgments. All right, let's look at tip number 7. Sum up major intervals.
And that, to me, is you ask them questions about what they just talked about, so that you can clarify. Make sure you heard them, so that they are understood.
Right.
So, I think questioning them and for yourself and for them helps that relationship, because you want to know what they're saying and feeling.
Right. And oftentimes the other person may be emotional, and we think we heard something, we didn't hear it. So summing up and repeating back to that person, which leads us to number 8. Let's go ahead and pull it up.
Ask questions for clarity.
Yeah. So if the conversation is pretty fast and pretty frantic, or if the other person's in an emotional state, asking those questions to gain clarity. oftentimes helps the one who's doing the talking. Say, no, that's not what I meant. And they come back and rephrase it so we can understand better.
Yeah, I mean, we could, questions like, did I hear you say this? Is this what you meant when,
Yeah.
and then you're clarifying it. They can say, no, it's not what I meant. And then you can understand them more as they explain more.
And then we check to see how they felt at that moment, how that make you feel, without making that a judgment to say you shouldn't have felt that way, because that's oftentimes our first response or reaction. Well, you shouldn't have felt that way. That's the wrong thing to do at that moment.
Yeah, but usually when you listen, you understand why they felt that way.
That's right. With the right listening skill, you start to understand why they felt that way. Empathy comes, the connection comes. They know that now they can trust you. You do care for them, and maybe, just maybe, you can help them. So that builds a relationship. And that's what this is all about, building relationships. Let's look at the last tip, Terri. Tip number 9. The most successful leaders have always made listening a priority. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, it said in the book, most people are able to hear, but few people are capable of really listening.
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of hearing.
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing a whole lot of listening. Listening takes intentionality. Yeah. Hearing just happens. It's there. We're going to hear it. But listening, tuning into it, takes intentionality and skill.
Yeah, which the question that come in my mind when I was reading that is, if we're not really listening, could that be why nobody understands nobody? Could that be why all the fights are going on in the heart? Because no one's stopping to hear the heart. Right. And listen. And I'm not even saying that none of us is right on what we're thinking, feeling, and ideas, but nevertheless, it's what it is. So we should still listen to each other.
That's you said something powerful there, because that misunderstandings lead to conflicts, they lead to divorce, they lead to dysfunctional homes, they lead to wars, they lead to all kinds of things, all because of a simple misunderstanding.
Just because you won't listen to hear.
We don't understand. So, I remember the story about a man on a train who had the 5 children on the train. They were coming back from this place, and the children were wild. They were kind of rambunctious. And this person on the train was wondering why this man didn't take control of his children. And finally, he spoke up and said, "Why don't you get your children under control?" He said, "You need to be a better dad than that." And the dad said, "Well, he said, we just come back from their mother's funeral, and I just don't have the heart to get them to them right now." See, instead of saying, what's going on with that situation, that man jumped to a conclusion that he was a bad father, but he was having a bad day. And oftentimes people are having a bad day. Unless we check to find out what's going on, we can make an assumption, which makes a judgment, which hurts the relationship. That's what it's all about. Relationships 101. So before we wrap up tonight, let's talk about the main point of this lesson. Terri, tell us what the main point is.
Intentional listening shows you care, shows respect, and lets others know that you are valuable.
Yeah, so that's the whole point. We want to show value to the other person, and listening is one of the best ways to show value to that person. Now, I want to pull this quote up here before we leave. Sign off. It kind of goes right along with this point. Let me pull it up here. Give me just a second. Most people wouldn't listen to you talk if they didn't know it was their turn next. We have enough of that quote.
Yeah.
So, but it's true, isn't it? Most people don't really want to listen to you unless they know that they can be engaged in that conversation too. So remember that. All right.
Challenge.
Oh, we got the challenge too, don't we? We got the weekly challenge. I almost forgot that. Tell them what the weekly challenge is.
Who is the one person you will intentionally practice better listening skills with this week? Be intentional. Make a plan.
So that means right now, before you go to bed, turn that TV back on. Write down that one person that you really want to improve your relationship with. And then think about how you can be a better listener with that person. Ask better questions. Not interrogation questions, but questions that are organic, that flow from the conversation, to check for understanding, to get more understanding of that person, where they're at, and watch and see if that relationship doesn't improve. I promise you that it's going to improve somehow. And if you mess up, come back to the tips, start again, and try it again. Don't give up, because we all need our relationships in our life to be healthy. It makes our life better, makes someone else's life better. Relationships 101. You be a winner, the other person will be a winner too. All right, well, I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. If you missed part of the show, just back up and you'll catch them all. There were 6 ways that good listening adds value to you and the other person. We shared nine tips about how you can actually do that, help you to do that. And next week, we're going to go on to lesson number 6, which asks the question, how can I build trust with others? And I think that's going to be a great lesson too. Terri, it's been a great time tonight. This is one of your strong suits, is listening, and I really appreciate your input. I think you add value to me tonight, and I've known you for years. And I'm sure you've added value to people in the audience too. So thanks for your input. All right. Well, you guys have a great night. Tune in next week at 7 o'clock, and we'll be right here. Thank you.